Imagine finding out that your spouse has been living a secret life, one filled with lies, deception, and betrayal. Now imagine discovering this truth, only to be silenced forever. A man devoted to his wife. A woman trusted by everyone. A secret too dangerous to be exposed. James Reynolds never questioned the life he built with his wife, Melissa. He trusted her, believed in her, and loved her without hesitation. But trust can be dangerous when placed in the wrong hands. Melissa Reynolds was more than just a nurse. She was a caregiver, a healer, a woman who dedicated her life to helping others. By all accounts, she was compassionate, hardworking, and deeply committed to her patients. But outside of her pristine white coat and reassuring smile, she was hiding something. Something that would eventually cost a man his life. James had no idea that his wife was living a second life, one carefully hidden from him, one filled with secrecy, hidden desires, and a relationship he was never meant to uncover. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and when they do, they leave destruction in their wake. What happened when James finally saw the truth? And how far would Melissa go to keep him from exposing her lies? The answer to that question would unfold in a way no one could have predicted. A slow, deliberate plan. One designed to end a man's life while keeping his wife's darkest secrets buried forever. This is the story of betrayal, murder, and a desperate attempt to silence the truth. A case filled with shocking twists, courtroom revelations, and a chilling motive that would leave everyone questioning just how well they really know the person sleeping beside them. James Reynolds was the kind of man people described as solid, dependable, a man of quiet strength who took pride in the life he built. He wasn't the flashy type, nor the kind to seek attention. He believed in hard work and commitment, in the simple joys of life, dinners at home, weekend drives with his wife, and the belief that love, once promised, should never be questioned. James worked in construction, a physically demanding job that kept him away from home for long hours. But he didn't mind. It was an honest living, and he believed it was enough. For 12 years, he had given his wife his full trust, his unwavering devotion, and in return, he asked for nothing more than the same. But trust, as James would soon learn, is a dangerous thing. Because sometimes, the person you trust the most is the one you should fear the most. Melissa Reynolds met James at a small-town diner in Missouri. She was fresh out of nursing school, bright-eyed and eager to make a difference in the world. He was a little older, already settled into his trade, confident in who he was. He fell for her kindness, her warmth, the way she could make anyone feel at ease with just a smile. She fell for his steadiness, his reliability, the way he made her feel safe. To those who knew them, they seemed like the perfect match, a couple that complemented each other. While James was quiet and reserved, Melissa was lively, charming. She had a way of drawing people in, making them feel important, valued. In their small town, she was well-liked, respected, the kind of woman who volunteered for local events, brought homemade cookies to her colleagues, and always seemed to have time for everyone. But what people saw wasn't the full story, because Melissa Reynolds had another life, a life she kept carefully hidden. For years, she managed to live in two different worlds. By day, she was the devoted wife, the skilled nurse, the woman with a reputation beyond reproach. But outside of that, in places James would never think to look, she was someone else entirely. Her other life started small, little secrets that didn't seem to matter. A late shift that wasn't really a shift. A trip to see an old friend that never happened. But secrets have a way of growing, and the bigger they get, the harder they are to contain. Melissa wasn't just keeping secrets. She was keeping a relationship. Her lover was a woman named Andrea Cole. Independent, confident. Everything Melissa felt she could never be when she was with James. They met through work, both in the medical field, drawn together by long hours, shared frustrations, and something else, something Melissa never allowed herself to acknowledge before. At first, it was just friendship, or at least, that's what she told herself. But lines blurred, feelings deepened, and before long, Melissa found herself caught in a place she couldn't escape, torn between the life she had and the one she wanted. James had no idea. For years, he suspected nothing. Why would he? His wife had never given him a reason to doubt her. But trust, once given so freely, can only blind a person for so long. The cracks were small at first. Melissa seemed distracted, distant. She had become secretive with her phone. Her work schedule suddenly unpredictable. Little things, a change in routine, an unfamiliar name on a credit card statement. Things that, on their own, meant nothing. But when you start looking, really looking, the truth has a way of staring back at you. James started to notice patterns. The late-night calls she wouldn't answer around him. The sudden need for privacy that had never been there before. The times when she would leave the house, only to return hours later with no real explanation. And then there were the moments, the ones James couldn't quite explain but couldn't ignore. The shift in her tone when she spoke to him. The way she would pull away when he tried to reach for her. The absence of something that had once been there between them. James Reynolds may have been a trusting man, but he wasn't a fool. The moment he started questioning his wife's loyalty, everything changed. Melissa knew she was slipping. Keeping a secret this big, for this long, had become exhausting. She had spent years balancing two different lives, telling herself she could have both. But now the walls were closing in. James was asking questions she didn't know how to answer. And Andrea was growing impatient. She had been patient, understanding, willing to wait. But how much longer? How much longer until Melissa would leave the life she had built with James and step fully into the one she had with her? Melissa was running out of time. And when people feel trapped, when they believe they have no way out, they make choices they can never take back. One of those choices would be deadly. James Reynolds never considered himself the jealous type. He never had a reason to be. For over a decade, he had trusted Melissa without question. He believed her late-night shifts, the work meetings that ran long, the sudden errands that took her across town. But something had changed. It started as a feeling, a tension he couldn't quite put into words. Melissa had always been present, laughing at his jokes, cooking their favorite meals, curling up next to him on the couch after a long day. But lately she wasn't there. Not really. She would smile, but it never quite reached her eyes. She would touch his arm, but it felt like a performance, like she was reminding herself to play the role she'd once stepped into so naturally. At first, James dismissed it. People go through phases. Work gets stressful. Maybe she was just tired. But then came the phone calls. Melissa had never been the kind of woman to guard her phone. It used to sit on the kitchen counter, untouched for hours. But now, it was always in her hand, always face down. The moment it rang, she would step out of the room, lowering her voice, her back turned to him. One night, she didn't realize James was watching. She answered the call, her voice barely above a whisper. He could only make out a few words, but they were enough. "I can't right now. He's home." His stomach tightened. That was the moment everything changed. James didn't confront her right away. He told himself he needed more than just a feeling, more than a single phone call. So, he started paying attention. And the more he looked, the more he found. Receipts from places she'd never mentioned visiting. Hotel bookings under her name. Bank withdrawals that didn't add up. And then the messages. He wasn't proud of what he did next. Melissa had left her phone unlocked. Just for a moment. Just long enough. His hands trembled as he scrolled. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe a message to a friend. Something innocent. Something that would make all of this seem like a misunderstanding. But what he found made his breath catch in his throat. "I can't keep doing this. I want to be with you. I love you." And then the response. "Then leave him." James put the phone down. His ears were ringing. His chest felt tight. Melissa wasn't just hiding something. She was hiding someone. That night, James waited for her. He sat at the kitchen table, the weight of what he had just discovered pressing down on him. When she walked in, he saw it. The way her eyes flickered with hesitation. The way she hesitated before setting her purse down. She knew. She knew he had found out. Who is she? Melissa froze. She didn't ask what he was talking about. She didn't try to play dumb. That silence had told James everything. For the first time in their marriage, she was completely, utterly exposed. James wasn't a violent man. He didn't shout, didn't throw things. but his voice was steady, his words sharp. He wanted answers. He wanted to know how long. He wanted to know why. The moment her silence became something else, something colder, calculating. Melissa had spent years hiding her double life, and now she realized she had two choices: tell the truth, or make sure James never told anyone what he had found. She chose the latter. The plan didn't come to her all at once. At first, she just wanted to stop him from talking, to make him let it go. But James wasn't the kind of man who could live with a lie. He had already made up his mind. If she wouldn't tell him the truth, he would find it himself. That was something she couldn't allow. Melissa knew how to make things disappear. She worked in a hospital. She had access to things most people wouldn't even think to question. And when you know how the body works, you know how to make it stop working. Poison. It was the simplest way. No blood. No struggle. No signs of a crime at all. If done right, it would look like an accident. Maybe a heart attack. Maybe something no one would ever second guess. And just like that, Melissa Reynolds made a choice that would seal her fate. James had discovered her secret, and now he had to die. The decision had been made. Now, all that was left was execution. Melissa Reynolds wasn't impulsive. She didn't act out of rage. This had to be done carefully, planned to the last detail. There could be no mistakes, no room for doubt, no questions left unanswered. She had spent years administering medication to patients, monitoring dosages, understanding how the human body responded to different substances. She knew what could be traced and what would dissolve without a trace. It was almost too easy. On the morning of the murder, Melissa moved through her routine as if it were any other day. Breakfast, coffee, a kiss on the cheek. James had calmed down since their confrontation. He wasn't at peace with what he had discovered, but he hadn't left. And in Melissa's mind, that was the mistake he didn't realize he had made. He stayed. He gave her time. Time to plan. That night, she made his favorite meal. A simple act. Something she had done 100 times before. But this time, there was something extra. A small dose. Slipped into his drink. Not enough to kill him. Just enough to weaken him. To slow him down. She needed him vulnerable. She needed him to trust her one last time. As the night went on, James began to feel it. A heaviness. A wave of nausea. He thought maybe he had eaten too much. That maybe he was just tired. Melissa reassured him, her voice soft, comforting. "You've had a long week," she said. "You should get some rest." He agreed. He stood up, but his legs felt weak. His vision blurred for just a second. But Melissa was there, guiding him, leading him to bed. By the time James lay down, he was already slipping. His body, once strong, once capable, was failing him. He couldn't keep his eyes open. He could barely lift his arms. Melissa watched. She sat beside him, waiting, listening to his breathing slow. She could feel his pulse against her fingertips, growing fainter. This was it. A second dose this time, the fatal one. She administered it with precision, ensuring there would be no struggle, no pain. Just a quiet passing. A peaceful ending to a life that had simply stopped. When it was over, she didn't cry. Not yet. She stayed in the room for a long time, watching, making sure. Then, finally, she picked up the phone. The 911 call was flawless. "My husband, he's not breathing." Her voice cracked at just the right moment. Her sobs were real, or at least they sounded real. She was a nurse. She knew exactly what the emergency responders needed to hear. By the time paramedics arrived, she was shaking, her face streaked with tears. She clutched at James's lifeless body, her grief so raw, so convincing, that no one questioned it. The doctors found nothing unusual, no signs of struggle, no physical trauma. James had been healthy, yes, but sudden, unexplained deaths happened all the time. Melissa played the part perfectly. She accepted condolences. She leaned on friends and family, allowed them to hold her as she wept. She spoke of James as if he were the love of her life, as if his loss had shattered her. For a while it worked. For a while, no one suspected a thing. But then there was a mistake. A single detail. Small, almost insignificant. Something Melissa had overlooked. And that one mistake It would be enough to unravel everything. For a while, it seemed like Melissa Reynolds had done it. Her husband was gone. The funeral had come and gone, filled with quiet sobs and heartfelt eulogies. Friends and family mourned James, never questioning the tragedy that had unfolded. But death has a way of leaving behind loose ends. And sometimes, the dead speak in ways the living never expect. James's body was scheduled for a routine autopsy. In most cases, when an apparently healthy man dies in his sleep, doctors suspect a heart attack, a stroke, something natural, something no one questions. And at first, that's exactly what the coroner expected. Until the tests came back, something was off. James's organs showed signs of damage inconsistent with natural causes. His blood work revealed foreign compounds that had no business being there. Toxicology confirmed it. This wasn't a medical condition. This wasn't an accident. This was poison. The report made its way to law enforcement, triggering an immediate response. A quiet death had just become a homicide, and there was only one person who had both motive and access: Melissa Reynolds. Detectives started where most investigations begin, with the person closest to the victim. They retraced James's final days, interviewing coworkers, neighbors, and friends. No one had seen anything unusual, but something stood out: Melissa's behavior. She wasn't too emotional, nor was she distant. She was just careful, composed in a way that felt rehearsed. And then the cracks began to show. Investigators took a closer look at her financial records. What they found told a story Melissa had tried desperately to keep hidden. Hotel receipts, late-night credit card charges, money withdrawals that lined up with nights James thought she had been working. And then the name, a transaction tied to a woman James had never met: Andrea Cole. Melissa's secret life had just become evidence. Detectives confronted her, but she stuck to her story. She was grieving. She was heartbroken. She had nothing to hide. But when they found Andrea, the story changed. Faced with questioning, Andrea cracked. She admitted to the affair. She admitted that Melissa had told her she was trapped in her marriage, that she wanted out. She admitted that Melissa had once asked, hypothetically, what it would be like if James were no longer in the picture. And that was enough to push the case forward. James Reynolds' death was no longer a mystery. It was murder. And the woman who had sworn to love and protect him was now the prime suspect. The walls were closing in. What had once been a perfect crime, silent, clean, undetectable, was now unraveling faster than Melissa could control. The poison had left a trace. The investigation had exposed her affair. The woman she had risked everything for had turned into a liability. And now the police were at her door. The knock came early in the morning. A crisp, deliberate sound that shattered the quiet of Melissa's home. She opened the door, still dressed in her robe, feigning confusion. "Mrs., we need you to come with us." At first, she played the part well. The grieving widow, bewildered by the sudden accusations. She denied everything. James had died of natural causes, she insisted. The toxicology report must have been wrong. The investigators were mistaken. But detectives had heard it all before. They laid out the evidence in front of her. The poison found in James's system. The financial transactions connecting her to Andrea. The messages, the affair, the carefully constructed alibi that was beginning to collapse under the weight of hard facts. And yet, Melissa didn't break. Not at first. She refused to admit what she had done. Instead, she deflected. She claimed Andrea was lying, that someone else must have poisoned James, that there had to be another explanation. But the evidence was undeniable. On November 3rd, Melissa Reynolds was arrested for the murder of her husband. She was handcuffed in front of her home, her face an eerie mask of shock and disbelief. Neighbors watched. Reporters swarmed. And for the first time since James had died, the truth was no longer a secret. The trial was swift, but it was anything but simple. The prosecution wasted no time laying out the facts. Melissa had motive, her affair, her desperation to escape her marriage. She had access, her medical training, her knowledge of poisons, and most damning of all, she had means. They detailed how she had planned the murder, how she had manipulated James into trusting her even as she poisoned him. They played back the 911 call, her voice filled with a grief that now sounded rehearsed. And then they introduced their key witness, Andrea Cole. She took the stand reluctantly, but her testimony was devastating. She admitted to the affair. She admitted that Melissa had spoken about wanting James gone. But then something unexpected. Under cross-examination, the defense pressed her. Had she been involved? Had she known what Melissa was planning? Andrea hesitated. For a moment, the courtroom was silent. And then she said something no one expected. "I didn't think she'd actually do it." Gasps rippled through the room. The defense seized on it. They argued that Melissa had only talked about wanting James gone, that she had never actually planned it, that the prosecution had no direct evidence tying her to the act itself. Was it enough? The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the room was tense. Melissa sat stiffly, her eyes fixed on the judge. The courtroom held its breath. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty." A sharp, guttural sound escaped Melissa's lips. Life in prison. No possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, she barely reacted. No tears. No outbursts. Just a slow, almost mechanical shake of the head. It was over. Melissa Reynolds, once a respected nurse, a beloved wife, a woman who had spent her life helping others, would now spend the rest of her days behind bars. And James Reynolds, he had trusted her, loved her, never suspected that the woman who lay beside him every night would one day become his killer.